Hey guys, it's Mike, and you're watching Mike's Rockin' Relics. And back in 2007, I picked up this book, which was the All Music Guide's top 1,000 classic rock albums, and it's every album and a little story about and a review about each one that they deemed to be the top 1,000 classic rock albums of all time. And now I'm not much usually for lists like this, but this one is very comprehensive, and I can say as of today, I have completed the quest and I now own every record in this book. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I did this and how I did it and sort of the significance of what made that important for me. So stay tuned and we'll talk about it. The All Music Guide is a website database that basically was very similar to Discogs before Discogs existed, with the idea that you could at least see the albums that were issued by a certain artist and a review on each record under that artist's name. It didn't have any information on records except the record label and kind of the year it was released, but it didn't have any sort of matrix numbers and certainly had no values or anything like that like Discogs does. But it was a valuable resource on the internet in the early days for me record collecting, because I just didn't know some of these bands. And when this book came out, I was going to be taking a long train trip, and I thought, well, this would be good reading on the train. And I just found that I fell into it. I just completely was absorbed by this, and it was kind of the treasure map for collecting for me. In 2007, this is, I think, predating when records would have been talked a lot about on YouTube. I'm certain, at least for me it was. I wasn't watching YouTube videos on vinyl collecting, and I don't think there was a vinyl community necessarily. Maybe there was, I just wasn't aware of it. So correct me if I'm wrong there, I'm not sure. But at that time I had been about 12 years into my vinyl collecting journey, the first 5 or 6 of which weren't very serious. I was just picking up records while I was in high school and college, just when I saw them, and really didn't know a lot about the bands I was picking up. Sometimes I would know the band from hearing them on the radio. Other times I thought, well, that's a pretty cool cover, I'll check that out. And at that point, records were not expensive and people were throwing them out or getting rid of them. So it wasn't as if I was putting out a lot of money either. And I didn't really know a lot about collectible records. In about 2004 or 5 maybe, I ended up renting a house and well, I guess an apartment in somebody's house, and the fellow who lived and owned the house was a very big vinyl record collector, and he was British, and he would show me records from England that I'd never heard about. This is where I sort of started collecting the Vertigo label. I didn't know much about them, and labels like Harvest and Charisma and Island. And I started to learn about a lot of the bands from England that I'd never heard of. So, and even, bands that I should have been aware of, like the early Fleetwood Mac period prior to, say, the Rumours album and things like that. Just this music was totally new to me because they didn't play it on the radio. It was just not something I was exposed to. So this, in the early 2000s, I learned a lot through him. And when I got this book, that's what it sort of did. This was the treasure map for moving forward and discovering new bands, and I just took it and ran with it. So as I got into this book, I went through my own record collection, and you can see as I've collected things, I've put little check marks in pencil next to some of these. And what I did was I just went through my collection, and I started to mark in here which ones I already owned. And I think at that point I probably owned about 400 that were in this book. Just as an aside, this isn't all I've collected. This is just something I did as a part of the hobby of collecting records. I thought this was going to be something I would do as a bit of a side project. And I just, as I saw new things, started to pick them up if I knew they were in the book. And it's gotten so ingrained in my brain now, I could probably recite this, and just go through it mentally. But as I've been out looking, I've been able to find a lot of these. The nice thing about some of these records is they were definitely printed in the millions. Artists like Elton John, and not obscure artists. Some are, but not all of them, and lots are were easy to find. And there's been times where I've unloaded a bunch to buy a really big record, knowing I can find these again, which I would do. I would just go around and $5 bins, pick them up again, rather than um, keep them and then shell out the money for a big one. Sometimes it's easier to do it in short spurts, maybe. It's my own kind of payment plan. So I have done that before, where I've moved some of these on and picked them up again. I'm definitely guilty of that. But the ones I did that with, I knew I'd find again. And, it also gave me something to look for when I was out, because at some point you do start running out of things to look for and things that you don't have already. So that was something I was doing. But this became quite a quest and a fun little project to do on the side, and it was something that kept me interested in records. And exploring some of these bands led me to other bands that aren't in this book, but groups that people have played in prior to the bands that are being mentioned in this book. It allowed me to kind of spot what that was and follow those artists to other areas. So it got me into a lot of other groups. And it was just a way to open my ears up to things that I never would have gone into a record store and intentionally picked out. And sometimes it was very successful and I really got into a new band. Other times it really didn't hit me and I thought, meh. But a lot of those I've hung on to because part of the quest, for instance, but also you don't know what your tastes are going to be like 5 years down the road, and where your musical journey is going to go. So sometimes, just by you learn that song on the guitar, and all of a sudden it does something to you. You think, oh, I really like that song now, and you end up kind of becoming more of a fan of a group that maybe you weren't 5 years prior. So this has been great to have this as a reference library, and in the day and age of streaming. I'm really glad to have a library of music that I can play anytime I want, and it just sounds, great on the turntable, and all those things that we like about collecting physical media. So I'm really happy to have that library, and one that I think was very well curated. I think this book was one that was very well put together and thought out, and the reviews in it are very accurate to me, and it's a good place to just start collecting. Now, in this book, the definition of classic rock is bands that were of the classic rock era, the early 60s to the mid 80s, but it does exclude, say, bands like Motley Crue. Some of the hair metal stuff is not in here. It does include a lot of hard rock bands, like Black Sabbath is in here, and AC/DC are in here. But a lot of the psych stuff that's maybe a little more obscure isn't in here. Bands like the Beacon Street Union won't show up in here, or things like that. So Incredible String Band, those types of groups aren't in here. So they're hit and miss with some of this. But you have groups like Blue Cheer that do show up, bands obscure, maybe a little more like Brownsville Station, that's in here. So there are bands that were kind of not on my radar. One was The Move. I was not aware of The Move and how they sort of turned into the Electric Light Orchestra. That was something I discovered through this book. So to me, it's pretty good, and if you really keep it in mind that it's classic rock centered, which is fine, that's what I like to listen to, it was a good place to start. And a lot of these records, because they were pressed in the millions, are very attainable and not very expensive. So it was a good way to pick up records cheap, to learn what I was into and what I wasn't. And not all of them were high priced, and some of them are very easy to find. You could go out today and find 100 of them, in a couple hours. So it's not tough stuff to find all through it, but some of it was, and some of it was a little bit tricky. So I'll show you some of the ones that for me were harder to find. Well, I don't know why these were really tricky to find. Maybe they are harder and more obscure, but I seem to have, I just pulled 3 of them out that I remember being kind of like years looking for. One was Message from the Country by The Move. We just mentioned that album took me a long time to find. Same with Dr. John, In the Right Place. I don't think that's an incredibly rare record, but For whatever reason, I just didn't come across it. I am located in Canada, so maybe there's less pressed here than there was in the southern United States. I'm not sure. NRBQ at Yankee Stadium might be the one that I had the most trouble tracking down. I think that took me over 10 years to find in the wild, maybe longer. So some of these were not easy, but that was half the fun and part of the challenge, and records that were a little more exciting when I did find them, and just be able to bring them home. And they're not expensive records, but they're ones that just for whatever reason I couldn't locate for the longest time. So that's the part of the quest that I will miss now, because that journey of tracking these records down was half of the fun. So that is a little history of, kind of a book that did a lot for me as a record collector. And I'm curious to know if you have any, how did you find music when you were collecting records and things like that? I know certainly the radio and people tell you about bands and things like that, but for me, it was a great way to kind of read some reviews and learn something about the artists that I was buying. And because, I wasn't around in the classic rock era. I was 1 year old in 1980. So it wasn't something that I grew up listening to. I had to learn. And, the internet was around, but there wasn't a lot of resources for record collecting at that time online. So this was a great way for me to get into it and to find things out. And, it worked out great. I was able to really start an extensive record collection this way, and it helped me narrow down the search, or to at least know what albums had been popular over the years and things like that. Now, of course, I collect tons of other things. This is not a book that's complete. As I mentioned before, it does stop right at the classic rock era. There are no 1950s artists in here. There's no blues, things like that. So it is very much classic rock, and that's what it was talking about. So it's a good place to start for very famous musicians and kind of records that are not incredibly hard to find. But then there's another maybe third of that book that will take some searching, and nowadays especially will take some real hunting, because to find that stuff in the wild can get really difficult. So that's where we're at, and that's my story of the quest. And today is a great day because the quest has been completed. So what was the one that finished it off? Let me show you. And this is the one that did it. The Small Faces Ogden's Nut Gone Flake completes the quest. And we're now at the top 1,000 classic rock albums according to the AllMusic Guide. I have no affiliation with the AllMusic Guide. This is not a commercial for them. But it was a very helpful resource for me getting started collecting records and finding new stuff to listen to, and exploring new bands. So I hope you like that, and tell me about your quest. Is there anything that you've been kind of set out to look for and accomplish? I love the fact that I did it without using eBay or Discogs or any of the features like that. This was all done through flea markets, Facebook Marketplace, record stores, traveling the world, and just finding records. So that was a great quest, and I'm on to the next challenge.